Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I am joined by Jim Tracy. He is a businessman, author, a Grampion, a grandpa who's a champion. That's a lovely portmanteau, which is a fancy word of two words squished together. And we're today we're going to be exploring his new book, Building Men: Lessons from Influencers. This is just stuff that he's picked up about men, manhood, and masculinity from everyone, from airline pilots to dog walkers and everyone you can imagine in between. This is a really fun topic for me because, as longtime listeners of this show know, I love talking about men, manhood, and masculinity. And in this day and age, the conversation is oftentimes controlled by what I would like to say kind of two very disparate groups who are focused on the same thing, approaching it from two very different angles. You have the camp of people I tend to talk to, a lot of whom are men who are not that this is a problem, but oftentimes gay and are approaching how do we approach manhood, masculinity, because a lot of us had to figure that out as young men who didn't fit this very narrow mold. And then on the other side, you have like Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson and some people who advocate for a type of masculinity that I don't necessarily think is very useful and is oftentimes predicated on the repression and oppression of others, women, minorities, immigrants, all this type of thing. So it's nice to talk to just a nice, normal, straight fellow. That's a nice value add to the conversation. But also to maybe get some tips and tricks and things that are very helpful to your life right now, that if you're sitting in the car commuting with me, you can take into your life today. It's a new book that's going to be out June 3rd in time for Father's Day, so we're excited to hear all more about it. Welcome, Jim, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Hey, man, thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be on with you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. So why don't we begin right from the beginning? Why don't you tell us a little about yourself and your book?
Wow. So I am a new Medicare guy. I just turned 66 years old
Oh,
and
nice.
have lived an incredibly, some would say, audaciously full life.
My
And
mother was sitting through the little online seminar you have to go through. She's 68. She's like, it's so boring. They never told us we would have to. It was so boring. She's like, but
it
I have
is.
to do this. It's terrible.
Yeah.
So, and
Well,
yeah.
anyway, born out in a rural part of South Dakota, six brothers and me make seven boys, one girl in our family, and yeah, just had a pretty egregiously normal childhood. And I moved up to Duluth, Minnesota. I was a welder by trade. And I saw a lady and I thought, I mean, I was headed for Alaska to go weld in the pipeline. And I saw this girl in a gold jumpsuit. And I first thought that jumped in my head is I'm going to marry her. And I'm like, that was stupid. Where did that come from? and, and then I asked her dad and he said, where are you going to college? And I'm like, dude, anywhere you want. If that's the price of entry, that's what I'll do. So I quit welding and went to college and got married and very young. I was 21 years old at the time, and we've been married now for 45 years. So it's worked out so far.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and so I started a career pretty young with pretty simple goals, like take care of your family and like keep on rolling. And then I worked my way through some pretty specific disabilities to especially where it contains math. And I worked my way up to the director of international business development for a company. And I was flying from Washington, D.C. to Tokyo and Narita, and I looked down over Chicago one day or one night, and I thought, wow, I'm missing my daughter's swim lesson. I quit. And shortly after that, my son and I started a business that built cellular towers and wireless infrastructure. And lo and behold, after 23 years of grinding it out, we had a pretty decent sized company with a couple of hundred employees, 180, I think, at the top. And we merged it into another company that had close to 1,000 employees nationwide, and have since kind of retired into a speaking, podcasting, writing. It's kind of a free spirit, do what I want role right now, and so it's pretty cool.
No, that's quite amazing. I knew some people who, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, when cell phones were really becoming a thing and there was a lot of build out required for that. A lot of people made quite a bit of money doing all of that. And I, Denver, not so much anymore. Denver used to be a real boom bust town.
Uh-huh.
I grew up in Denver, and we had the Quest US West whole thing. And when the financial issues happened, that kind of caused a local recession for us. But there's a lot of people who did very well. And then when those businesses struggled to replicate that income. But that's a great long story long to say you were very lucky
Yeah.
and had a great business, and that's amazing.
Well,
So
better to be good timing than to be really smart, I guess.
no, there's a really great no, absolutely. There's a really great scene from a movie called Margin Call with Jeremy Irons and Kevin Spacey and all this type of thing. And he says there's, kind of two ways to win in business: be first or cheat. Or no, three ways to win in business: be first, be smarter, or cheat. And he's like,
Yeah.
I don't cheat. I know we're pretty smart, but there are people smarter out there than us, so let's be first. You
Yeah,
know
there
what
you
I
go.
mean? Yeah.
That's
So
that's that's a good philosophy.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about your book, what inspired you to write it, and what is it really about?
Wow, a lot of things inspired me to write it. But number one, as I entered like the speaking gigs and I got up on stage afterwards, I love talking to audiences afterwards. And I would get down, and people would ask me like, "Where did you learn that?" And I'm like, all my stuff is copied. so so I would relate a lesson about where it came from, and those started to add up, and I realized that there were people that invested in me when I was a little kid, and when I was a teenager, and when I was going into college, and when I was through college, and in my career, and then people who work. That the book is filled with people that are younger than I am too, and that's why I didn't say character lessons from old dudes. I said character lessons from influencers, because many times, especially when I think about technology, the people who have that technology, they're trying to teach it to somebody who's got a little silver in his hair, and they're not required to they it's easier for them to just do it for you, but they would actually take the time and coach me a little bit on the keyboards and teach me how to do it. So all of those lessons that I've learned were from people who did not necessarily need to take the time, and because they truly did invest in me. And it started when I was a little kid, and it's still going today with my grandkids.
No, no, that's quite impressive. I'm always amazed, as someone who's always been an outlier and an outsider, and someone who's kind of always looked outside at people who have those types of relationships. Um, how impressive I've always been with them, and how crucial I've always thought that was. And especially considering I was not the one getting it, I was kind of like, oh wow, I really wish I could, be in there with that, learning from, those people or whatever have you. So your
Yeah.
book is very helpful. It'll give me the inside track. And so
Yeah.
yeah, what are some of the what do you feel like are maybe some of the biggest lessons contained in the book?
Well, every chapter has a theme, and the theme is a characteristic. Like there's one that is. I got a call from him last night, so it pops right into my mind. It's called
Hmm.
perseverance, and as a dog trainer, I my wife bought me a dog, and so I tried to train the dog, and I wasn't frankly very good at it. And there's two guys that came alongside me. One, his name is Harry, and I went through the first stages of training, and I was just killing it. I went through the intermediate stages. I was like 4 for 4 in these competitions, and then I got into the what they call the master level or the senior level, and I was 0 for 11 on my first 11 attempts, and it was misery. And I was, and so, but these guys, they kept encouraging me. They could have said, "Hey, man, 0 for 11, you should do this math lesson and just fold up your tent and go home." But they were like, "Man, you're so close. You can do this. You can." And the lesson. in that chapter is about perseverance. And so it's literally a story about people who encouraged me to persevere when the outcome did not look like it was going to be good. That they could have taken, two tacks there. They could have said, it would be easier if you just, folded up your tent or slowed down or, everybody, and there's cheap advice everywhere. And these guys just encourage me to persevere. So the title of that chapter is Perseverance.
No, no. I mean, there's something to be said for time and market.
Mm,
Um, and that's I say that because that's an area where I always struggle. I always joke with people, I'm the most impatient person, in terms of I'm totally prepared to wait, but I also wanted it yesterday,
yeah,
sort of thing.
yeah.
Um, and there really is something to be said for time in market, time doing it, and how,
Hmm.
things change when you are at something for a while. You meet different people, you learn small things. You sometimes learn to keep doing something when the rest of life gets very difficult and
Yeah.
things fall apart and all this sort of thing. Um,
One of the
and
things that
so,
really
yeah.
comes up in from that perspective is I talk in my keynotes, I talk about the types of learning. And from my perspective, there's literally two types of learning. The first is training by trauma. And that's when we say I'm going to do it no matter what. Let me do it myself. Leave me alone. Blah blah blah. And you just charge ahead, and you get all the wounds and the scars that are associated with that. The second is learning from others who've been down that path before, and that is really low tuition in comparison to training by trauma. And so as you look at the methodologies of learning, you can either choose high tuition, and that's kind of difficult, but it's a great teacher, or you can choose a equally good teacher, and that's learning from others. So,
No, I mean, one of the marks of a profound person is the ability to learn from others' mistakes.
yeah.
I think there's a limit to that at some
Uh-huh.
level. I think there's no replication for personal experience at a certain level. I think there's others' mistakes can help you avoid certain kind of what I would call big dangers. Like, for example, one does not need to go find out about drug addiction to find out. That's probably not a great idea.
Yeah.
Um, but when it comes to, things like managing interpersonal relationships, recovering from a big fallout with somebody you have to continue to work with, all that type of thing, and those are just small examples of many other things. Nothing replicates personal experience.
Yeah.
And just the things that you learn by spending time on the planet. My birthday was a couple weeks ago.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And I kind of was. There's so many things now that we're in the late 30s, which is sounds very weird to say, and I'm still getting used to that.
Hey, try doubling it.
No, but there's so many things that I'm kind of like, I can't fault my younger self for not understanding with it. For I'm not understanding because I had to get this old to understand it, sort of thing.
Yeah. Hmm.
And especially in my field, I oftentimes kind of understand why some of the most successful people in media, entertainment, writing, whatever have you, tend to be older than I am now, sort of
Hmm.
thing, or didn't find their way until this stage of life, because I do think there's something to be said for you gotta go around the sun a certain number of times before some
Yeah.
of this stuff starts to click in. It's weird that way,
Yeah. Well, my son is a rancher, and he says I'm only going to tell you one time not to pee on an electric fence.
Yeah. Well, if
Because
you
the
do it
second
again, you'll
time,
find out
no
the
one
hard it
will
gets.
ever need to tell you again.
Yes. No, and many such cases and many things in life, many things in life are certainly that way sort of thing. But there is something to be said for time and market and that perseverance and just age, keeping going,
Hmm.
understanding, figuring out,
Yeah.
how all this stuff works, and sometimes watching stuff play out over time.
Yeah.
to become like, oh, this went on for three and it fell apart. Oh, I see now why this happened, sort of thing, in a way that, yeah. And it's kind of funny because as many young people do, when we're young, we think we have the entire world absolutely at our grasp and under our belt. And I think one of the marks of getting older is being like, there's a whole lot you don't know, a whole lot of experiences you do not have, a whole lot of things that are just unknown. And I think you get more aware of it and comfortable with that as you
Hmm.
get older as well, which I always think is fascinating, sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So, what do you think is the marker? I promise this, we're gonna get back to you now.
No
Um,
worries.
what do you think is the marker of a solid man?
Wow. You know, I do a lot of consulting with companies, and they usually call me when they have a problem, and they don't call me until there's a problem. Let's put it that way. and and as I approach them, many people walk in the front door and take the elevator up the ivory tower. And I put on jeans and flannel shirt, and I tend to go in the back door. And I look at their plant floor, and I look at the people and their countenance. And I was at a business recently where I went in the back door, and for the first half hour, nobody even knew that I shouldn't be there. That I was like a stranger among us. And
Right.
and what I find is that in especially in terms of leadership, because that's kind of the people who start a good business and who keep a business good. Um, it all gets down to character, and if that character does not translate through down to the lowest level of employee pool, then what happens is they begin not to care. And that really is exhibited by someone who doesn't ask who you are or why you're there. So I would say that and it's not just in business, it's in America today. The biggest fault that we have is a lack of character. And that really breaks down into doing what you say you're going to do, doing doing it when you said you were going to do it, and exercising the discipline to get back to those first two and say, hey, in our business, it was a frantic business, as you mentioned, and people would like, I need it Wednesday, and we're like, well, we'll certainly try, but it looks like Friday.
Yeah.
And and if you say, we'll try for Wednesday, and they can't accept that, then you got to go, I don't think we can do that. So let's not try. You'll have to find somebody else who's going to lie to you.
Yeah.
And the natural course of us is to want to please people when our natural obligation is to actually speak the truth to them. So, and that came up with a whole lot of phrases, which is the next book.
No, no, absolutely. I mean, that is, I mean, I think, I mean, and I wonder what you think about this. I think it's very easy and we've seen this in the modern era, although there are many historic examples. How do you build that in an organization when the big kind of top guy who's infused his character into the organization leaves or retires and
Mhm.
someone new comes along? How do you keep that character going?
Number one, I think in American business today, organizationally, as we grow, we lose our tendency towards enter the entrepreneurial spirit that built the business. Then we get into systems and processes and scaling and protocols and permissions and things like that. And in this story, or in this book, there's a chapter about character, and it's really revealing. I'm going to go back to a different story. There's a guy at a school, and he was a principal of a school that my children went through, and he would stand by the front door every day, and he would shake their hand, and he would say, just do the right thing. Everybody that came in, just do the right thing, and just do the right thing. And that kind of got adopted as a mantra of our business, because there was beauty in its simplicity. And it was just literally magnificent. And it was so good that my partner, my son and I went into a meeting with one of our largest clients. And when you're in wireless and you may have four and then three and then a number of clients is
Yes.
really limited, you have to
Right.
take really good care of them. We went into a meeting, and so it's two of us on one side of the table and about seven of them on the other side of the table. And they said, well, how do you make sure that your people are going to do a good job? And my son Ryan said, well, we just tell them to do the right thing. And there was another young upstart on the other side of the table, and he kind of wanted to prove himself. And he said, so what do you do when they don't know what the right thing is? And Ryan he's a pretty smart dude, as if I do say so myself. And he said, well, we just ask them to do the best right thing. And this was pretty frustrating to the other guy. And he's like, well, what happens if they don't know the best right thing? And Ryan, again, he's pretty disarming, but he smiled. He said, well, we give them a phone and then we tell them to call us. We'll help them figure out what the best right thing is. And if you think about it, if someone is given the freedom and the autonomy to do the right thing, to do the best right thing, or to call somebody and figure it out with them without fear of errors or mistakes or retribution or you're stepping on my parade, then you develop a culture that enables people to ask questions. When you have a group of people that's not afraid to ask the questions, then you become unafraid to give them answers. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that has to be adopted by the next generation. And when you grow your leaders from the organization itself, it's incredibly helpful. Works in families, works in organizations, works in schools, works in and it actually flips around toxic work environments in about a month and a half.
No, I think that's I think the operative word there is trust.
Mm,
If you don't trust the people who are doing stuff for you, in my mind, why did you hire them in the first place?
yeah.
But that also makes it creates that culture of reliability where if people think you trust them, then that in 99% of cases is something people will take and go do really great stuff with, sort of thing.
And then
Obviously, there's always an
it
outlier that
goes
will
back
blow
to
up in your
that
face, but
character.
it's very important.
Yeah, also it goes back to that character because they won't trust you if you don't exhibit that character, which makes you worthy of trust or trustworthy. So
Yes.
that's something that as a leader of any type of organization, you don't have to earn it every day. You got to earn it every moment. You got to make it every decision you make. And then when you pooch it, when you screwed up bad, you got to go, wow, I'm really sorry. And transparency fosters credibility. And you're like, my bad. Help
Yeah,
me out.
no.
I'm relying on you guys to bail me out because I'm the boss man, and now I made us all look stupid.
No, there's always a classic story I heard years ago, um, and it was between manufacturing cultures between Toyota in Japan and General Motors in the US.
Mm.
And at Toyota in Japan, they had these cables called Undon cables. And if there was something wrong on the production line, anybody from the lowest wrench turner could pull one, and it would stop the entire assembly line until the problem was solved. They trusted the lowliest person to be kind of like, something has gone wrong, and I'm going to stop the entire facility so we can fix this problem. Then in America, they went to Japan. They thought this was brilliant. They came back and said, we'll install all these sort of things, but they didn't trust the employees to use them. So they would install them, but disconnect them, or install them
Mm.
and never connect them. Because at General Motors, it was the assembly line never stops. Ever,
Yeah.
not ever, for no reason, never, ever stop. And so they would turn out cars with the wrong fenders, the wrong hood, missing all. And so guys would tell these stories about, yeah, I got a lot of overtime in the 70s and 80s fixing all the production mistakes in the yard before the cars went
Wow.
out, sort of thing. But it was really a matter of trust.
Yeah,
General didn't trust.
for
In
sure.
Japan, if there was someone who was building a car and said, "Oh, we need this is awkward to do. We need a better tool for this," the engineers would come, learn what the problem was. They would go away, build that tool, bring it back, and say, "Here you go." Never at General Motors, ever. No one wanted to hear any production tips from the people actually doing the work. The
Yeah,
engineers were busy. They were all this sort of thing. Just put the fender on the Buick
yeah,
sort of thing. And it was, and the big, from that whole thing, it's really a matter of trust.
yeah,
There was a antagonistic, distrustful relationship, which quite frankly exists to this day, between management and the worker.
for
And
sure.
but the reality is in Japan, that level of trust produces the most reliable cars in the world that run forever on an
Yeah,
oil change, a hope, and a prayer.
yeah,
Sort of thing. So no, it is absolutely vital and vital and important. That's really good. That's really good.
yeah.
Um, when it comes to, I do not have children myself, but I know many of my listeners do, or are at the stage of life where they're trying to do that. What does it take to raise really great men?
Mm.
Because that's a
Um,
hot topic these days. There's a lot of, I mean,
yeah,
I'm sure you've noticed there's been a lot of complaining about how millennials were raised by boomers. That's my generation. I have a new book coming out this summer about millennials and everything.
yeah.
I'm telling our economic story. And there's been kind of even more dialogue about the failures of Gen Z, sort of thing. And, all the antisocial behaviors. And it's like, oh, the problem with society is the phones. No, it's everyone has their own idea. But if you're a parent now listening to this, what does it take to raise really great men?
Well, I would look back, and I would look back at my grandpa was born in 1903. That's the first chapter of the book. That was my first influencer. And so
Hmm.
as I look at them, there's the greatest generation, and after that, my silent generation, and then me, the boomers, and there's also millennials and Z's, and now even an alpha in the book.
Yeah.
And the reason that's important is the silent generation said these are the greatest generation said these silent generation, they listen to that wacky music and they dance funny, and their
Mm.
shorts their skirts are too short, and now they're wearing all these flashy clothes,
Yeah.
and then the silent generation said these boomers are out of control. They're hippies, their hair is too long, they wear those bell bottom pants. And they dance funny and their music's awful. And then we said, oh, those millennials, they're incorrigible, blah, 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 blah. And that's when rap started. So my bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you go down to the next one, and whether it be heavy metal or different clothes or whatever, every generation has had these negative commentaries about the ensuing generation, and they should have looked in the mirror. Because as I look towards the generations, I see there are three things that I talk to groups about. When you want to engage a generation, the first thing is generous listening. It's the biggest finger on your hand, tallest, most important. And you have to be a generous listener with your ears, your eyes, your mouth closed, and your phone upside down, and focused in, and actually trying to interpret meaning rather than formulate a response. And that's the way you get the second finger, and that's how it's got a ring on it, so that's how you develop a relationship. And that's how I remember the ring finger is relationships. And if we don't work at developing relationships through generous listening and then giving our time to people, then we're not going to earn them. And then that's the third one, the littlest, the pinky finger on your hand. If you lose your pinky finger, you lose 50% of the grip of your hand. Half the grip is gone. And so that's why this one's the most important, this one's the most important, and then this one's the most important. And that one is respect. And I ask audiences all the time, is respect given or earned? So I'll ask you, is it given or earned?
I've always been in the camp that it's earned,
Yeah, but it's both.
but I realize I'm in the minority on that point.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know that you are. I think it's about a 50-50 split. Most people that are old school would say it's earned, and most of the newer generation would say it's given. But I think that if we give respect before it's earned, or if we earn respect before it's given, isn't it always up to us? So the healing of the generations involves generous listening, building relationships, and respect. And if we do those three things, that is a perfect methodology for modeling to children.
Mm.
So it's not just about generations, it's about, I mean, every part of your life. If you're a generous listener who builds respect or who builds relationships and then gives a little respect, offers respect before it's earned and earns respect before it's offered. I mean, this is like win-win-win, isn't it?
One would hope. I mean, it sounds very, very attractive. I think we have a very interesting modern dynamic that I don't think was really a thing before, and certainly has not been a thing in anyone's lifetime, where we have four different generations working in businesses and companies at once.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, something that organizations have a hard time handling because it's usually not that way. People live longer now. The older generation used to get out of the way, not because they retired. No one was rich enough to do that. They died. And
Hmm.
whereas now, boomers are staying in the workplace. Sometimes they can't afford to retire. Sometimes they don't want to. Um, and you have, Xers who are at the prime of their working life. You have
Yeah.
millennials who are getting into the prime of our working life. You have Gen Z who's come along now. And so we have this very odd, kind of really new situation where we have anywhere between 2 to 4 generations working in a workplace at any given time with you think about like my childhood was very close to my mother's childhood. But even I know people 5 or 6 years younger than me who had a very different childhood than I did. And so it's like
Hmm.
we're starting from very different worlds and places and ideas and socialization, radically different education systems, a lot of, like, didn't you learn that in school? No, they got rid of that a long time ago when they brought in
Yeah.
standardized testing, and so, just very different things. And so I think a lot of organizations are struggling to incorporate all these different generational attitudes under one roof. And you have, I think one of the real difficulties, and this has certainly been true of my generation, and I'm sure Gen Z is complaining of it too, is how kind of unresponsive management what it is to them, their needs, the reality, and especially when you start talking about, compensation per hour and all this type of thing. It's like, well, I know that probably sounds like a lot of money to you, but in today's dollars, no.
Yeah.
It's like in today's dollars, like, no, that's not even. I had one job in Seattle that the boss was kind of like, oh yeah, this is, really great. You're 26 and you're making, $42,000. I'm like, yeah, but that's 38,000 after taxes, and I live in Seattle. And the only reason I was able to afford that job was I lived in a lady's basement with no bathroom and no kitchen. Um, Sort of
Yeah.
thing. I would have never been able to afford housing to work at that job literally any other way, sort of thing. And a lot of the old just don't understand, like, no, that sadly, that's not even a unique kind of sad story. Like, that's just been normal for us, sort of
Yeah.
thing. And so there's a lot of, I think, difficulty in communication just because things are so different.
Hmm.
I remember I rented an apartment in 2005 for $400 a month. That apartment's now $2,000. They've done nothing in the intervening checks notes 20 years. Also, things are just so different now. And in another day and time, this wouldn't be a problem because the older generation would have moved on, sort of thing. And, in 40 years ago, we wouldn't be dealing with the rumors in the workplace. Actually, the millennials would be in charge, sort of thing, and it wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
But now we're in this kind of unique situation where we're all trying to cohabitate together, and it's not going well, here as I
Well,
can tell.
I think that there's places where it's going really well. And the reason I say that again, I'm gonna impart some of that old dude wisdom. When I was a kid, I could start driving, and I got my driver's license at 14 years old, but I was driving when I was 12.
Yeah.
And so I my experience started earlier in life, and then apprenticeships. You could start an apprenticeship at like 16 years old, and what I think has been partially lost in that is the generation before mine, the silent generation or the World War II generation. They all said, I'm going to make it better for my kid than it was for me. So
Well,
I'm
they've
going to
been through the
work.
Depression,
Oh
and that was
yeah,
devastating. Yeah.
and I'm gonna work my fingers to the bone until it happens. And quite frankly, they spoiled us. And then we said, hey, we have to work at least as hard as our moms and dad did. So, in order to do that, we have to bring the women into the workplace. And so, when we did that, we turned out the first group of latchkey kids who did
Yeah.
have, we'll say, adequate supervision at home.
Yes.
Ended up in a lot of bicycle accidents and house fires and really
Yes.
cool stuff. But I see hope at the end because now the Z's are realizing that they want to be mentored. And so as I look around the workplace and the workforce now, I see a generation that just longs for mentorship. And that's really,
Ooh.
I have a lot of hope in that. And I think there's some places where we also actually have five generations in the workplace now because there's old scroats like me who are still there. Now,
Yeah.
I'm in my own workplace. I'm not in a workplace with the other people. I've got a couple of people that I work with, but yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how it pans out, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it will be interesting. The transition I'm interested in is the one that's starting to happen as some boomers who can afford to really begin to retire, and
Hmm.
that is Gen X really moving into high like C-suite leadership and all that type of thing.
Uh-huh.
And we see shades of that at some places, like Mary Barra at General Motors, who started
Hmm.
out on the line. They haven't had an engineer in charge of a car. It's strange. We're going to hire someone who builds cars to run a car company. Weird. Who would do that? And you start to see that very different leadership style. It's a little bit more down to earth, I think, because they came up differently.
Yeah.
We're starting to kind of see shades of what, you know, Gen X as a leadership generation, and there won't be very many of them because Gen X is so small. It'll be very interesting to see, what that leadership will be. I think it will be even more fascinating as my generation finally gets into leadership to kind of because we're so collaborative and so into group cohesion and all this type of thing, and Gen Z is not. I'm that will be an interesting conflict in about a decade because Gen Z they kind of want to be left alone, sort of thing, and
Yeah.
we're kind of like, no, come join our cuddle puddle, sort of thing. Like that's it. It's going to continue to be interesting as time goes on. But I mean, given that a lot, and sometimes we see shades of this, like especially in politics, because you can get into high levels so much younger. Like with Pete Buttigieg, I always said he's not going to get elected, but that's what a millennial president sounds like. Listen,
Mm.
everybody, in 10, 15 years, that's what a millennial president's going to sound like, sort of thing. And I think
Yeah.
and the way he kind of manages transportation and everything is very interesting, sort of thing. And I think even in some different candidates, you start to see what a Gen X president may sound like a little bit, and kind of what that might look and sound like. And so I think that will be very interesting sort of thing. I think the biggest kind of weirdest change, I kind of wonder what you think about this, is we've lived under the boomer control of everything for so long, in culture, in business, and everywhere. And it's finally starting to crack a little bit. And we're finally
Hmm.
starting to find out no offense, but what life is like without y'all.
Yeah.
And that I think is gonna be very interesting. I think that is where there can be a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation, and for some people, probably a lot of money to make
Uh-huh.
in ways in which society will change when, this largest generation is no longer, in charge of everything, influencing everything, controlling everything. I think that's going to be interesting moving forward.
It's also going to involve the greatest transfer of wealth the world has ever seen.
I just
And
posted something about that last week on the CamAndJoel.com. I
yeah,
did, yes, we're talking, the numbers range, but it's all, one figure, according to an article, $81 trillion of money is
it's
about
just
to,
staggering. Yeah.
yes.
However, what I've experienced is that as a guy, and so as for many years, I was the oldest guy in our company,
Yeah.
and it was started by me and a millennial. And if you think about that, that's I had a guy who started at 18 years old, who knew the industry a little bit, and a dad who knew the industry a little bit, and we worked through it together. But all the people who worked alongside him were also millennials, and as I age out, I look at them, and it's a little bit daunting because sometimes I see a picture of me, and I see the development that I went through, and they are not coming around to be like me based on exposure to me. It might be a little bit of that, but most of it is that what you talked about before was the depth of experience that was generated over time. And I'm looking at them, I'm like going, oh my gosh. I remember the day I thought I'm walking like my dad, and now I look, my kid is walking like my dad. So our perspective is going to change, and I'm going to go back. If we listen generously, regardless of generation, if we work hard, invest the time in building relationships, and if we give respect before it's earned and earn respect before it's given, most of the problems that you talked about in light of communication would be solved.
No, I think that's very important. And on a lot of times, and I find this, I'm now currently in a role where I'm managing a team for the first time. That's not just like contributors or models or hosts for entertainment, like in nightlife, all this stuff, like very day to day spreadsheets and documents sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, I'm really finding and it's kind of funny because I'm a better people person than the big boss is.
Ooh.
I find most of the time, and someone told me this years ago, and it's kind of one of those things like, oh yeah, someone told me that 10 years ago, and I now see it's true. Really, people want to be seen and heard.
Uh-huh.
Um, we had a kerfluffle last week. We're doing a new website, and I made some last minute changes by fiat without sending around emails and checking and collaborating, and that caused some angry emails and all this sort of thing. And all I did was kind of like, I had to make these changes, but I hear you, and we'll try to do better in the future. And the next meeting, all of a sudden, it was fine. And it's like we didn't actually have a problem. They just wanted to be heard in that moment, and
Yeah.
me just being like, yes, I hear you, I see you, I did it, I'm gonna own it, I 110% did all this type of thing,
Sure.
and we'll just have to do better in the future because I'm not undoing it, sort of thing. It needed to be done.
Yeah.
So I think, but it really was a matter of when if you have people feel like they're seen and heard, that will get you very far.
Uh-huh.
That will solve a lot. And and also to build relationships over time by, building closeness, helping people with different things. There's this kind of, people kind of joke about middle management, but as someone who's kind of in that space now, I'm like, oh no, there's actual skills. I have developed skills that are different than managing models or musicians or magazine contributors. Like there's a skill to standing between the top and the bottom and getting fire from both, which is
Uh-huh.
what's sitting in my inbox right now, which I will
Friendly
deal with after
fire.
we get off of this. Like there is a science to do it. Like there is
Mhm.
actual real skills to middle management sort of thing. And so now I'm kind of like, it's actually kind of not fun to make fun of middle management because there actually really is something to it. There is actual skills required in dealing with these different dynamics and understanding who people are individually, what they bring to the table, all this sort of thing. And I've learned a lot about that, especially from um the big boss. He's very good at being like, yeah, this is a habit this person does, sort of thing, and helping find the
Awesome.
pattern and working all this sort of thing. And yeah, there, but there is definitely a science to it. There's definitely a science to it. But that seen and heard thing is very important. Very, very important.
I think if I look back and I reflect on this book, Building Men, the biggest single part of the way that people influenced me is that middle ring finger that's called relationships. Because
Yeah.
many times people think, well, I'm going to go like spend 7 minutes of quality time with this person. Well, I mean, it might take you 700 minutes to get those 7 minutes of quality time. So investing the time into that relationship, that the price of a relationship is always measured in minutes and in hours, not in dollars, and not in, and because you get these wonderful opportunities. I always say that, like, I'm a pilot, and when I'm flying, you've got these long periods of boredom followed by short bursts of intensity,
Yes.
and those are always closer to the ground. But you can't learn anything during the boring times. You can only learn stuff when there's a little bit of greater risk. And so, but you got to go through all those hours to learn to go back to land again. And so much the same with management, especially middle management, because you are caught in that sandwich between the two pieces of bread that are both hard as a brick and want to smash you. And so if you invest time uphill and downhill, oh, you'll see that it will become easier and easier and easier because it's going to build trust. And we're going to go back to that first character thing and go, man, invest the time.
No, no, it's very true. So I also work for my book publisher as director of publications and anthologies, and that title encompasses I touch every part of the company. And so
Yeah.
that's how I end up, really kind of ending up being between everyone who does a lot of wonderful, amazing stuff for us and all this sort of thing, and the guy who owns it. And the relationship thing definitely goes both ways, to where sometimes I'm kind of like, Emma, do I work for you or am I your therapist? And some days
Yeah.
it's both. It's like it's definitely I'm like I actually put this on my resume. It's like where on the resume does managing your boss's emotions go? Sort of thing. And sometimes, not even necessarily related to the work or anything, just, having what I call them human moments,
Yeah.
and how important. But I mean, the relationship thing, I'm autistic, and I had never realized how important that relationship building aspect of everything was, and how important soft skills were. I was always a hard skills person. To be kind of like,
Uh,
I can do one, two, three, A, B, C, and D. I don't really want to get to know you. I certainly don't want to be your friend. I have friends, thank you, sort of thing. And very early on, when I was doing door to door freelance marketing for local businesses, I was always getting these invites to drinks and parties, and I would never go. I had no interest. And one of my friends who's older and farther up the line said, he's like, no, no, you have to start going to that shit. Like, you need to start building, real relationships with these people outside of, fixing up their websites and their Google business profiles and all this type of thing. Um, and he was 110% right. And even in this, which is definitely, and we're a startup, so it's not corporate, it's more corporate. Even in that context where, we're not always meeting up in person because our team is remote first and all this type of thing. But even so, sharing those real human moments,
yeah.
having people be seen and heard, and and building on stuff over time, proving you're reliable, you can get stuff done, you're willing to hear when you made a mistake, cause someone inconvenience, and own it, not run away from it. All that type of thing that matters for people trusting you and believing you. And even with the big boss, there's sometimes where I literally will say, "Do you want to talk about this, or do you trust me to do something?" sort of thing. And over the 2 years, it's actually 2 years this week, he's gotten to the place where he's like, I just deal with it.
Yeah.
You will do the right thing. Just go and deal with that.
Just do the
Okay.
right thing.
Yes, exactly. To bring the conversation full circle. Yes, that's like okay. I'm gonna deal with this and let you know what happens, sort of thing. And so that whole soft power relationship thing is absolutely so vitally important. And I wish I had learned that 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So there's a lady, she's an amazing person. Her name is Krista Haverstock, and she runs a business called Bookable Speakers, or the C Agency. But anyway, to your point, she said, half my job is making sure that my folks are doing a great job out, when they get on stage, and the other half my job is a speaker therapist.
Yes. Yeah. No. No. It is a little bit of it is a little bit of both. I do that with writing coaching clients as well. The very first meeting I have when we're getting ready to do someone's book or whatever, I will say, "I'm going to be your writing coach. We're going to write a and we're going to make your book absolutely fantastic. I'm also going to be your part-time therapist for the next however many months this takes." And it really is true. I mean, I've sat on the phone with people and we've talked about their divorce, why they didn't get divorced, how they saved their marriage, all this type. I mean, their children, their fam, all this type. I mean, we've
Yeah,
gotten into all of those things in the course of doing. I just tell people right up front, don't be afraid because we're going to go there.
yeah,
We're going to become learn a lot about each other as time as time goes on
yeah.
and and gets through this. And it is and I have to kind of build that relationship very fast for the sake of their work. um
Hmm.
and go from there. And we learn a ton about each other and get sometimes probably unnecessarily involved in each other's lives. um
Yeah.
but people, I mean, I think people really crave that human connection. And I really wish I'd understood the dynamic more a long time ago, because I would have networked differently. I would have spent more time, maybe not necessarily doing things,
Hmm.
but talking with people, making more friends, making more social
Sure.
connections, all that type of thing.
They
Um,
say that people don't
yeah,
know that they don't care what you know until they know that you care.
yeah. And I only sadly recently understood what that actually meant. Um, Sadly enough for me, and how really important all of that is. And for me, my calling card always was, I'm super smart, I know how to figure things out, you can throw me in the deep end of the pool and I will come right back up, sort of thing.
Yeah.
um and that's all fine, and that's all fine and well when you have a great relationship with someone who knows that they can
Hmm.
do that sort of thing.
Sure.
But that doesn't necessarily matter if they don't know you because they can't trust you yet. You
Right.
know
Trustworthy, worthy of trust.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we've reached the top of the hour. So why
All
don't we
right.
do two things? One, why don't you give us
Okay.
a final thought about the book Manhood Masculinity, and then we'll do plugs.
Okay. Um, I'm just going to go back into the topics that are characteristics of the book. And I look and so there's some in there that you're not going to expect, especially out of a boomer. One, I had an uncle, and his name was Earl, and he's in one of the chapters. And Earl went to the University of South Dakota, where they immediately recruited him because of his sheer size to play offensive line without a face mask for the University of South Dakota Coyotes, and he was a starting right guard for 4 years for someone by the name of Dick Night Train Lane, who went on to play in the NFL and stuff like that, who
Yes.
credited Earl. But he was a big man, and he was a powerful man, and he had an intensity, but he also had a characteristic that not many people saw. He was a very meek man. He was brilliant in his humility. He could give you a look and it could say, don't worry, everything's going to be all right. But he could also give you a look and it say, if you do that again, it won't go well for you. And you would know the difference between the two. And I characterize meekness as the power that is not exercised. And if you look at it's a lot of people said if you get on the Autobahn and you're driving a Volkswagen and you're able to pass a Lamborghini, you just saw meekness. And so it's power under control. And that's one of the characteristics that I think is probably a good representation, because when I talk about him, I talk about it what it looked like when that was modeled for me, and he didn't have to. So, and that was an uncle in the book.
No, that's wonderful. So good, excellent. No, that's yes, very, very, very much so. Where can we find you online, and how do we keep up with you?
I think LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, but I have a podcast on YouTube called the Grampion, Grampion, and
Wonderful.
that's where Grandpa chats with champions, and it's we have a lot of fun there. Best place is probably the Jim Tracy. Jim Tracy was taken, so it's thejimtracy.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Hey man, it has been a joy and a pleasure. I appreciate you very much.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you.